Skyscrapers rise in Abu Dhabi, but what if its story began not with steel or oil, but with a single gazelle? Imagine hunters chasing it across an empty desert, unaware they were running toward a discovery that would change history. How did that small moment grow into global cities filled with glass towers and innovation? In this podcast, we explore the journey from survival to ambition, from desert sands to space missions. Can the footsteps of a gazelle really lead to the heights of skyscrapers? And what does that mean for the future of a nation? The sun rose each day like a burning coin, heavy and unrelenting. In the heart of the Arabian desert centuries ago, life bent beneath its weight. The land stretched wide and bare, dunes rolling like waves of gold, with only the hardiest plants daring to take root. Water was scarce, hidden deep in wells or caught in rare rains that vanished almost as soon as they fell. Every drop mattered. People learned to watch the clouds, to listen for the faintest trickle of water, and to dig where their ancestors had dug before. Survival depended on knowledge passed down through generations, and one mistake could cost a life. The tribes who lived there understood this truth better than anyone. Alone, a person could not last long against the desert's hunger. Together, they endured. Kinship was not just family, but a lifeline. Men and women relied on each other for food, shelter, and protection. When danger came, whether from a sandstorm, a raiding party, or the desert itself, it was faced as one. Cooperation shaped every decision. If one tribe member fell ill, others shared their portion of water. If a well ran dry, the tribe moved together, guided by elders who remembered old roots. Trust was the glue that held them together. Betrayal meant ruin. The desert itself was a map, but only for those who knew how to read it. Signs of life were everywhere. If one had the eyes to see, a cluster of hardy shrubs might signal hidden moisture beneath the sand. The flight of birds could point toward a distant water source. Even the wind carried messages, its patterns warning of storms or shifting dunes. These natural signs became a language, and the tribes who understood it could travel great distances while others would wander aimlessly. A journey was never made blindly. It was guided by instinct and memory, honed over countless generations. Animals shared in this struggle, and in many ways made human survival possible. Camels in particular were more than beasts of burden. They were lifelines. Their bodies were made for the harsh climate. A camel could travel for days without water, carrying heavy loads of goods, tents, and supplies. Its milk was food, its hide became shelter, and its strength carried families across endless miles of sand. Gazelles, too, played a vital role. They provided meat when other food ran short, and their presence often signaled that grazing land and water were nearby. In this way, the desert's wildlife became partners in survival. Taking life was never done carelessly. Each hunt was measured, ensuring balance so that tomorrow's needs could still be met. To those who lived there, the desert was both an enemy and a teacher. It punished carelessness. But traveler who misjudged the distance between wells or failed to pack enough water might never return. At the same time, it taught resilience. The desert stripped away excess, leaving only what mattered. It forged people who were sharp, cautious, and deeply tied to one another. This dual nature shaped the stories told around fires at night. Some tales spoke of danger, of entire caravans lost to sudden storms. Others told of triumph, of tribes who crossed vast distances by trusting one another and reading the signs written in sand and sky. Centuries ago, before cities rose and trade routes crisscrossed the region, the Arabian Peninsula was a land of constant movement. Permanent settlements were rare. Instead, families and tribes followed the seasons, chasing grazing land and water. When one area became barren, they packed their tents and moved on. This way of life was not aimless wandering, but a pattern refined over generations. Elders remembered the paths their ancestors had walked. They knew which valleys held water after rain and which ridges offered shelter from the wind. These routes were lifelines, invisible to outsiders, but clear to those who belonged to the land. An early Bedouin caravan might begin its journey before dawn. A leader, often the oldest and most experienced, rode at the front on a tall camel. Behind him, women and children rode in covered litters, while men walked beside the animals, guiding them carefully. The air was cool at first, but as the sun climbed, the heat grew fierce. At midday, the group rested under cloth awnings stretched between poles, conserving strength and water. Travel resumed in the late afternoon, when the light softened and shadows stretched across the sand. Every stop was planned. Wells were known by name and guarded fiercely. At each one, a ritual unfolded. Water was drawn carefully, shared in measured amounts, and stored for the next leg of the journey. Nothing was wasted. On these journeys, danger came in many forms. Sandstorms could rise without warning, turning the sky dark and the air unbreathable. Tribes developed ways to face them. Camels were forced to kneel, and cloths were tied tightly around mouths and noses. The group would huddle together, waiting for the storm to pass. Raiding parties posed another threat. Resources were scarce, and conflict over wells or grazing land was common. Tribes formed alliances for protection, with marriage often sealing these bonds. A wedding was not just a personal union, but a promise of peace between groups. These migration routes were more than paths through the desert. They connected people. Along them, tribes exchanged goods, stories, and news. A lone traveler might bring word of distant rains or warn of a rival tribe's movement. These exchanges shaped decisions and ensured that no group stood entirely alone. Over time, some of these routes grew into trade networks. What began as survival paths later carried goods like incense, spices, and textiles, linking the Arabian Peninsula to faraway lands. But in the centuries before cities and markets, these routes were simply the veins of life, carrying the lifeblood of survival across a vast and unforgiving land. The desert demanded respect. Those who gave it earned the right to live another day. Those who ignored its lessons vanished into its silence. In this way, the desert shaped its people as much as they shaped it. Through hardship, they built resilience. Through scarcity, they forged bonds that held strong even when the sand shifted beneath their feet. The desert was quiet that morning, the kind of stillness that made every sound sharp. A group of hunters moved carefully across the sand, their camels stepping lightly, their eyes scanning the horizon. They had been searching for game for days, their water nearly gone, their food stores low. Then one of them saw it. A gazelle stood on a rise, its coat pale and shining in the early light. It turned its head toward them, ears alert, its slender body tense and ready to run. For a moment, no one moved. The hunters felt a rush of hope, as if the desert itself had offered them a gift. The leader raised his hand, and the group spread out, circling wide to cut off the animal's escape. The gazelle bounded forward, its leaps graceful and quick. The hunters gave chase, shouting to one another, their feet pounding the hard-packed earth. Sand flew into the air, stinging their faces. The gazelle darted between dunes, its speed unmatched, its movement smooth and sure. The hunters pushed themselves harder, their throats dry, their muscles aching. Each step felt heavier, but they refused to slow down. This was more than a hunt. It was a test of endurance, and the tribe's survival hung in the balance. The chase stretched on as the sun climbed higher. Heat shimmered in the distance, turning the horizon into a wavering mirage. The men were close enough to see the gazelle's dark eyes and the curve of its horns. Yet it always stayed just out of reach. Sweat darkened their clothes, and their breath came in sharp bursts. One hunter stumbled, falling to his knees, but the others kept running. Their leader called back, urging him to rise. There was no turning back now. To stop would mean defeat, and defeat in the desert often meant death. Then something strange happened. Instead of running deeper into the dunes, the gazelle changed direction. It moved toward a patch of land the hunters had never seen before. They followed, puzzled but desperate. As they crested a final rise, they stopped in shock. Before them lay water, real water, stretching wide and glittering in the sun. The gazelle leapt gracefully onto a low island in the middle of this unexpected oasis. The hunters stared, their mouths dry, their minds struggling to understand what they were seeing. In a land where water was life, this felt like a miracle. The men waded into the shallow water, their exhaustion forgotten. They drank deeply, filling their skins and washing the sweat and dust from their faces. The gazelle stood on the island, watching them with calm, unafraid. For a brief moment, they felt as if it were not merely an animal, but a guide sent to lead them here. Then, with a final leap, it vanished into the scrub beyond the water's edge. The hunters never saw it again. They returned to their tribe with the news. Their words carried excitement and disbelief. Water, they said, enough for everyone, an island rich with promise. At first, some doubted their story, but when they saw the hunters' full waterskins and the joy in their eyes, they began to believe. The tribe packed its tents and followed the hunters' path, guided by their tracks and memories. When they arrived, they saw what the hunters had seen. A place where the harsh desert gave way to life. The air smelled of salt and fish. Birds wheeled overhead, their cries filling the sky. The people fell to their knees in gratitude. The gazelle became a symbol from that day forward. In Arabic culture, the gazelle had always represented beauty and grace. Its speed and elegance were admired in poetry and song. But now it came to mean something more: survival, divine guidance, and hope. The tribe believed the gazelle had been sent by higher powers to show them this refuge. They called the place Abu Dhabi, meaning father of the gazelle, to honor the creature that had led them there. The name carried a promise to remember and protect the land and its gifts. Life on the island began with simple steps. Families raised tents made from woven palm fronds and camel hides. The first shelters were small and fragile, swaying in the coastal wind, but they offered shade and safety. The people learned to fish in the shallow waters, crafting nets from twisted fibers and using spears carved from bone. Fish became their main source of food, joined by dates carried from the desert and whatever plants they could grow near the water's edge. Slowly, the rhythms of their days began to change. Instead of wandering endlessly, they built routines. The tides became as important to them as the shifting sands once had been. At night, they sat around fires and told the story of the gazelle. Children listened wide-eyed as elders described the chase, the exhaustion, the moment when the desert seemed to open and reveal its secret heart. Each retelling added new details. Some said the gazelle's coat shone like silver. Others swore it vanished into thin air before their eyes. These variations did not matter. What mattered was the lesson. When all seemed lost, guidance could come in unexpected forms. The desert might test them, but it would also provide for them if they stayed alert and faithful. As the settlement grew, the story became more than just a memory. It shaped how the people saw themselves. They were no longer wanderers clinging to survival. They were chosen, guided to a place where life could take root. This belief gave them strength in times of hardship. When storms destroyed their tents or fish grew scarce, they remembered the gazelle. As they had been led here once, they could find their way through future trials. Their identity became tied to the land and the creature that had revealed it to them. One evening, as the sun set over the water, the tribe's leader stood at the edge of the island. He watched the tide roll in, carrying bits of driftwood and shells. Behind him, children laughed as they played near the tents, their voices rising in the cool air. He thought of the chase, of running with lungs burning and legs ready to give out. He thought of the gazelle's final leap and the way it had seemed to vanish like a spirit. Without that moment, none of this would exist. The fires, the laughter, the hope of a future, all of it traced back to a single animal and a single day. Over time, travelers from distant tribes arrived and heard the story. They carried it back to their own people, spreading the tale across the desert. Some believed it fully, others treated it as legend, but all agreed it held meaning. The desert was vast and often cruel, yet here was proof that even in its emptiest places, wonders could be found. The name Abu Dhabi began to appear on maps, its origin whispered with reverence. The gazelle's memory lived on, not only as a story of survival, but as a symbol of the bond between people and land, between the seen and the unseen. The sea was both a mystery and a promise. For the people of Abu Dhabi and the nearby coasts, it offered food and trade, but most of all, it held treasures hidden beneath the waves. Long before oil, pearls brought wealth to the region. At first, they were rare discoveries, found by chance while gathering shellfish. Then, over time, the people learned where to look and how to dive for them. Pearls became more than ornaments. They became a currency, a way to trade with distant lands, and a source of pride. The start of the pearl season was a time of great preparation. Families gathered on the shore as dhows, sleek wooden boats built for speed and strength, were made ready. The divers checked their simple tools, nose clips made of bone or turtle shell to keep seawater out, ropes tied around their waists to help them rise quickly, and baskets woven from palm fronds to hold the oysters they collected. A stone weight hung from a rope, used to pull the diver down fast before his breath gave out. There was no room for hesitation. Each dive was a race against time. When the season began, the sea came alive with activity. At dawn, the divers slipped into the water, guided by the rhythm of the waves and the shouts of the crew above. They descended into the blue silence, holding their breath, their bodies straining as they searched the seabed. The ocean floor was covered with rough shells and sharp coral. Fingers moved quickly, feeling for oysters hidden in crevices. A good diver could stay under for over a minute, his chest burning, his mind focused only on the task. Then he tugged the rope, and the men above hauled him to the surface, gasping and clutching his basket. Pearl diving was dangerous work. The sea held many risks: sudden storms, powerful currents, and the ever-present threat of sharks. Divers suffered from burst eardrums, lung injuries, and exhaustion. Some never returned from a dive. Families understood these dangers, but relied on the trade to survive. While men dove, women and children played vital roles on shore. They repaired nets, wove ropes, cooked for the crews, and prepared goods for trade. Even elders contributed by teaching younger generations the skills they would need. In this way, entire communities were bound together by the rhythm of the pearl season. The rewards were great, but never certain. After days of diving, a single perfect pearl could transform a family's fortunes. Merchants came to the shores to buy and sell, their eyes trained to judge the size, color, and luster of each find. A flawless pearl fetched a high price, destined for markets far beyond the region. India prized pearls for jewelry and religious ceremonies. Persia valued them for their beauty and status. Even across the Red Sea, in Africa, traders exchanged goods for the coveted gems. This network of exchange linked Abu Dhabi to distant cultures and economies, bringing spices, textiles, and metals in return. The rise of the pearl trade spurred another craft to flourish: shipbuilding. The dhows that carried divers and merchants were works of art as well as tools of survival. Built from teak and other strong woods, their hulls were designed to cut cleanly through the water while holding heavy loads. Shipwrights passed their knowledge down through generations, each detail learned through trial and error. The sails, made of woven cloth, caught the desert winds, allowing the boats to travel far beyond the horizon. These vessels were not only for pearl diving, but also for trade voyages that connected the Gulf to the wider world. Abu Dhabi's location gave it a natural advantage. The coastline provided safe harbors where ships could anchor, and the nearby islands offered shelter during storms. From this position, traders could move goods across the Arabian Gulf and beyond. The routes stretched east toward India, west toward Africa, and north toward Persia. Each journey carried not just goods, but stories, ideas, and traditions. Markets buzzed with many languages as merchants bargained over spices, dates, textiles, and, of course, pearls. During the 18th and 19th centuries, these trade routes grew stronger. A dhow leaving Abu Dhabi might carry sacks of dried fish, baskets of dates, and crates filled with pearls. It would return laden with rice from India, silks from Persia, or ivory and gold from the African coast. Along the way, the crew encountered diverse cultures. They prayed alongside strangers in distant mosques, learned new songs from sailors in foreign ports, and tasted foods they had never known before. These exchanges shaped the identity of the people, blending old desert traditions with new influences from across the seas. One voyage could take months. The crew slept on deck beneath the stars, their sails glowing in the moonlight. At night, the sound of the water against the hull was their constant companion. Storms could strike without warning, turning calm seas into walls of water. When that happened, survival depended on skill and trust. The captain's commands were shouted over the wind, the crew working as one to keep the dhow from capsizing. Returning safely to port was cause for celebration, the journey marked by songs and feasts shared with those waiting on shore. The pearl trade did more than bring wealth. It shaped the rhythm of life. Entire villages emptied at the start of the diving season, their people scattered across the sea. When the season ended, they returned with stories of distant lands and goods that carried the scent of foreign markets. Children grew up listening to these tales, their imaginations filled with images of crowded bazaars and colorful sails. Over time, these experiences wove together into a shared sense of identity, one that valued resilience, adaptability, and connection. Not every story was one of success. There were years when storms destroyed fleets or when oysters yielded few pearls. These hard seasons tested the community's strength. Families tightened their belts, shared what little they had, and prepared to try again the following year. Even in failure, the sea remained central to their lives. It was their source of challenge and opportunity, danger and reward. As trade deepened, so did cultural exchange. Merchants brought not only goods, but also ideas. Architecture began to reflect styles seen in India and Persia. Clothing adopted patterns and fabrics from far-off places. Even music and poetry carried hints of foreign influence, blending with local traditions to create something unique. This mixture enriched the lives of the people, giving them a broader view of the world while grounding them in their own history. Through it all, the dhow remained a symbol of this era. Its curved prow and tall sail came to represent the spirit of exploration and resilience. On any given morning, one could stand on the shore and see these vessels scattered across the horizon, their sails white against the blue. Each one carried not just goods, but the hopes of the families who built them, the memories of countless voyages, and the promise of a future shaped by the sea. The sea gave, and the sea took away. In the years when the pearl trade reached its height, the waters of the Gulf were alive with boats, their white sails dotting the horizon like scattered clouds. The world desired natural pearls, and the Gulf was their heart. Merchants from distant lands sailed into its ports, their ships heavy with goods, their minds fixed on profit. In markets crowded with voices, pearls moved from rough hands to skilled traders, and from there to jewelers and kings in far-off cities. Abu Dhabi and its neighbors became known as places of wealth, their people tied to the rhythm of the tides and the seasons. Each year began with anticipation. When the pearl season opened, entire villages seemed to vanish into the sea. Families said their farewells on the shore, women and children waving as dhows set sail with crews of divers, haulers, and navigators. The men would be gone for months. The work was hard, the danger constant, but the promise of what lay beneath the waves drove them forward. On land, the village grew quiet. Life revolved around preparing for the return, mending tools, and keeping the homes ready for when the fleet came back. Pearls passed through many hands before reaching their final owners. The divers were the first link in a long chain. They brought their catch to the surface, where haulers collected the baskets of oysters. Onshore, the oysters were opened, and the pearls carefully sorted by size and luster. Merchants examined them with trained eyes, their fingers quick and precise. A perfect pearl might bring enough wealth to feed an entire family for a year. Once sold, it began its journey across deserts and seas, often traveling alongside spices, textiles, and precious metals. This network connected the Gulf to India, Persia, Africa, and beyond, carrying not only goods, but stories and traditions. Wealth flowed through the ports. Markets expanded, and new districts grew up around them. Some families became known for their trading skill, passing their knowledge down through generations. With wealth came influence. A successful merchant could support his entire extended family, pay for the building of boats, and sponsor voyages. These men were not only traders, but also leaders, shaping the future of their communities. Their decisions determined who prospered and who struggled. The cycle of the pearl trade shaped the rhythm of village life. When the fleets returned, the air was filled with celebration and relief. Boats were unloaded, their cargo carefully recorded, and the profits divided. Women prepared feasts, fires lit up the shoreline, and songs echoed across the water. Children ran among the crowds, wide-eyed as they watched their fathers and brothers return. But even in these joyful times, there was tension. Not every season was bountiful. Some years brought storms that scattered the fleet, or the oysters yielded few pearls. When this happened, the celebrations were quieter, and families braced for lean months ahead. The ports were the lifeblood of the economy. They were not only places of trade, but centers of stability. Goods flowed in and out, and with them came information. Sailors brought news of distant events, from wars to shifting alliances between kingdoms. This knowledge helped local leaders make decisions, whether to form new trade partnerships or prepare for coming dangers. The ports connected small desert communities to a much larger world, one that depended on the Gulf's treasures. For a time, the system thrived. The wealth from pearls allowed for the building of sturdier homes, the import of new foods and fabrics, and the growth of complex social structures. People began to dream of futures beyond mere survival. Education became more valued, and some families sent their sons to study abroad. The Gulf was no longer an isolated region. It was a vital player in global trade, its pearls prized by the rich and powerful. Then, almost without warning, the foundation of this prosperity began to crumble. In Japan, a new method for cultivating pearls was perfected. These cultured pearls looked as beautiful as the natural ones, but could be produced on demand. Their arrival on the world market changed everything. Suddenly, the rarity that had made Gulf pearls so valuable was gone. Prices fell sharply. Merchants who had once held power watched their fortunes shrink. Divers found their skills less needed, their risks no longer rewarded. As this economic blow spread, another disaster struck. World War I disrupted trade routes and drained resources. Ships that once carried goods now carried soldiers and weapons. Markets that had been open for centuries closed almost overnight. The Gulf's ports grew quiet, their docks empty, their warehouses filled with unsold goods. For many families, poverty set in quickly. Men who had spent their lives at sea were forced to take what work they could, often for meager pay. Some migrated to other regions, hoping to find opportunity elsewhere. Entire villages saw their populations dwindle as people left in search of survival. The social fabric strained under the weight of these changes. Without the wealth of the pearl trade, disputes over land and resources grew sharper. Marriages that had once been arranged to unite families in prosperity now carried the burden of shared hardship. Children went hungry, and education was no longer a priority. Even the great dhows, once symbols of pride and skill, sat abandoned on beaches, their sails torn and useless. Yet even in this time of loss, resilience emerged. Communities adapted in small ways at first. Some turned to fishing as a primary source of food and trade. Others began to explore inland routes, carrying dates and other goods across the desert. Families learned to live with less, pooling resources and sharing labor. Elders reminded the young that the desert and the sea had always been harsh, that survival depended on unity and determination. These lessons were spoken around fires at night, the same fires that had once been lit in celebration of pearl fleets returning home. The memory of the golden era remains strong. People told stories of the bustling markets, the gleam of perfect pearls in a merchant's hand, and the thrill of a fleet setting sail at dawn. These stories were not just nostalgia, they were reminders of what had been achieved and what might one day be possible again. In this way, even as poverty spread and migration scattered families across the region, hope persisted. The Gulf had weathered storms before, both literal and economic. Though the pearl trade's decline left scars, it also planted seeds of strength that would guide the people through the changes still to come. The world was changing, though the desert at first seemed untouched by it. Across oceans and continents, machines roared to life. Factories burned fuel day and night, and the demand for energy grew without end. Nations searched for oil, the black liquid that powered this new age. Word spread of the Gulf's hidden wealth, and foreign companies sent their explorers to seek it. For generations, the people of Abu Dhabi had relied on the sea and the land. Now, a new resource stirred beneath their feet, one that would alter their lives forever. The first teams arrived by ship, bringing heavy equipment and strange tools. They faced a land unlike any they had known. The desert's vastness swallowed their vehicles. There were no proper roads, only narrow tracks marked by memory and starlight. Supplies had to be carried by camel or boat. The heat tested both men and machines. Sandstorms swept in without warning, burying equipment and scattering camps. Water was scarce, and every drop had to be guarded as carefully as the fuel they burned. These foreign workers relied on the knowledge of local guides who read the land like a map, pointing out safe routes and hidden wells. Negotiations with the tribes were as challenging as the terrain. Land was not empty in the eyes of those who lived there. Every stretch of sand and every patch of palm trees belonged to someone, tied to generations of ancestors. Explorers sat beneath tents with tribal leaders, offering gifts and promises. They spoke of partnership and progress, but the local leaders weighed their words carefully. They knew that accepting foreign companies meant opening their land to forces they could not fully control. The talks were long, sometimes tense, but without agreement, no drilling could begin. Among these leaders was Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, a man with a vision beyond his time. He understood the hardships of his people, having walked the desert with them and shared their struggles. He also saw what the future might hold if the oil was used wisely. While others feared the changes it would bring, he believed it could build schools, hospitals, and roads, lifting his people from poverty without losing their traditions. Sheikh Zayed negotiated with patience and strength. He demanded fair terms and respect for his land, ensuring that the benefits of oil would not flow entirely to foreign hands. The early years of exploration were filled with setbacks. Wells were dug and came up dry. Machinery broke under the strain of desert conditions. Months turned into years, and many began to doubt that the effort would succeed. Then, one day, everything changed. Deep beneath the earth, drillers struck oil. At first, it was only a dark glimmer in the sand, but as the pressure built, it surged upward, coating the rigs and tools. The workers shouted, their voices carrying over the roar of the machinery. Word spread quickly. Men rode to nearby villages to tell of the discovery. People gathered to see for themselves, their faces lit by firelight and wonder. This was no ordinary find. It was the beginning of a new chapter. The site of the first successful well became a place of constant activity. Workers labored day and night to control the flow, building makeshift storage tanks and laying pipelines. Foreign engineers worked side by side with local laborers, communicating through gestures and shared determination. The smell of oil hung heavy in the air, mingling with the desert wind. Sheikh Zayed visited often, standing quietly as he watched the work. In his mind, he saw more than barrels and machinery. He saw roads stretching across the desert, schools filled with children, and hospitals where no one would be turned away. The first shipment of oil was a moment of both pride and awe. A massive tanker anchored offshore, its hull towering over the dhows that once carried pearls and fish. Barrels were loaded carefully, each one representing a piece of the future. When the ship departed, its path cutting across the Gulf, it carried with it not only oil, but the hopes of an entire region. Across the world, markets took note. Newspapers reported on the new source of energy flowing from Abu Dhabi, linking this once remote land to the industrial centers of Europe, Asia, and beyond. The effects on local life were immediate and profound. Jobs opened up as oil companies hired men to work on rigs, in transport, and in construction. For many, it was the first steady wage they had ever known. Roads began to snake across the desert, replacing camel tracks with wide paths that could carry trucks and buses. Travel between villages that once took days could now be done in hours. Clinics were built, staffed by doctors from abroad, bringing medicines that saved lives once lost to simple illnesses. Schools opened, their walls filled with the sounds of children learning to read and write. For women, healthcare brought safer births and stronger families. For men, work brought stability and the means to provide for their households. Yet with these changes came challenges. The old ways did not disappear overnight, but they began to shift. Families who had once lived by the sea now found their futures tied to the land and the oil beneath it. The songs of pearl divers faded, replaced by the hum of engines and the clang of metal. Some elders worried that traditions would be lost. Sheikh Zayed listened to these concerns, urging balance. He encouraged the preservation of culture, even as modern buildings rose and foreign workers arrived. His vision was not only of progress, but of harmony between past and future. As the oil industry grew, foreign companies brought in new technologies and knowledge. Local men learned to operate complex machinery, to read blueprints, and to manage logistics. Skills that had once seemed distant became part of everyday life. Markets filled with goods from around the world. Radios, clothing, tools. The villages of Abu Dhabi began to resemble towns, their streets lined with shops and homes built of concrete instead of palm fronds and mud. The desert, though still vast and untamed, was no longer a barrier. It became a foundation on which to build. The memory of that first well remained strong in the minds of those who witnessed it. They remembered the moment when the earth itself seemed to awaken, releasing the dark liquid that would transform their lives. They remembered the pride on Sheikh Zayed's face as he stood among his people, knowing that this discovery was not just about wealth, but about possibility. The oil did more than fuel machines abroad. It fueled a dream of a future where no child would go hungry, where families could thrive, and where the harshness of the desert would be met with human ingenuity and unity. For those who had grown up in the age of pearl diving, the change was staggering. They had once measured wealth in small, shining spheres found beneath the waves. Now, entire ships carried away their new treasure, invisible beneath the sand until revealed by drills and sweat. The desert had given up its secret, and with it came a new dawn for Abu Dhabi and its people. A dawn lit not by fire or sun, but by the promise of oil. The desert villages began to change almost overnight. Where once there had been clusters of palm frond huts and narrow dirt tracks, new buildings began to rise. The discovery of oil had unlocked a wealth unlike anything the region had ever known. The revenue poured back into the land, fueling projects that reshaped the very landscape. The sea and desert that had once defined life now became the foundation for something entirely new. People who had grown up walking barefoot across hot sand found themselves standing in the shadow of tall concrete walls and wide paved roads. At first, the changes felt unreal. The same men who had spent their youth diving for pearls now watched machines dig deep foundations for hospitals and schools. Concrete mixers churned day and night, their steady rumble blending with the hum of trucks and cranes. Modern housing replaced old family compounds, offering running water, electricity, and sturdy roofs that could withstand storms. Where once families had huddled together in single-room huts, they now had homes with separate spaces for sleeping, cooking, and gathering. The difference was more than physical. It changed how families lived, worked, and imagined their future. Education became a priority. Schools appeared across the towns and cities, their whitewashed walls standing bright against the desert sun. For the first time, classrooms filled with boys and girls learning side by side. Many parents had never held a book themselves, yet they urged their children to study. Teachers came from abroad, bringing new languages and new ideas. Children who once spent their days herding goats or helping with fishing nets now carried satchels filled with notebooks. They learned not only reading and writing, but also science, mathematics, and geography. These lessons opened doors to jobs that their grandparents could never have imagined. Hospitals rose alongside the schools. Trained doctors and nurses arrived from around the world, bringing medicines and techniques unknown in the region before. For centuries, illnesses had been treated with herbs, prayers, and the limited knowledge of local healers. Now, mothers could give birth in safe, clean rooms with skilled hands to guide them. Children who might once have been lost to simple infections grew strong. Life expectancy increased, and families began to plan for futures that were longer and healthier than any they had known before. The fear that had always shadowed sickness slowly gave way to trust in modern care. As the towns grew, so did the need for careful planning. Roads were laid out in grids, neighborhoods organized to make travel easy and efficient. Urban planning became an essential part of the transformation. In Abu Dhabi, wide boulevards were designed to connect new districts to the coastline. Parks and green spaces were added, offering shade and a place for families to gather. In Dubai, the natural waterway of Dubai Creek was deepened and expanded to handle larger ships. Warehouses and docks lined its edges, turning it into a thriving hub of trade. These projects were not just practical, they were symbols of a new era, showing the world that these cities were ready to stand among global centers of commerce and culture. One of the most celebrated developments was the Abu Dhabi Corniche. The coastline, once a rough edge of sand and shallow water, was transformed into a sweeping waterfront. Workers dredged the seabed, reclaimed land, and built seawalls to protect it. Palm trees were planted, walkways paved, and lights installed to shine at night. Families strolled along the Corniche in the evenings, watching ships move across the horizon. It became a place where the old met the new, a space for traditional gatherings framed by modern architecture. The rapid growth required connections far beyond the region. Airports were built to handle the flow of people and goods that now crossed the skies. Ships no longer only carried dates and fish, but containers filled with electronics, machinery, and textiles from every corner of the world. The Gulf's ports expanded to meet this demand, with cranes rising above the docks and cargo ships lined up to unload their goods. These routes linked the region to global markets, making the once isolated desert a vital node in international trade. Foreign workers played a central role in this transformation. Engineers, architects, doctors, and teachers arrived to help build and run the new infrastructure. Laborers came from nearby countries and distant continents, their hands shaping the roads, towers, and airports. The cities became a blend of cultures, languages, and traditions. Markets filled with foods from many lands. Streets echoed with accents and songs that reflected the diversity of the growing population. For many locals, this influx was both exciting and challenging. It brought new opportunities, but also required careful balance to preserve their own customs and values. With growth came difficulties. Rapid change put pressure on every system. Roads became crowded as cars replaced camels and carts. Waste management, once handled informally, now had to be organized on a massive scale. The sudden rise in population created housing shortages, even as new buildings went up at astonishing speed. Some neighborhoods struggled to keep pace, leaving temporary camps for workers scattered at the city's edges. Traditional ways of life began to fade. Pearl diving, once central to the economy, became a memory told in stories rather than a living practice. Elders watched with mixed emotions as the rhythms of fishing seasons and tribal migrations gave way to the schedules of offices and schools. Sheikh Zayed and other leaders guided this transition with vision and care. They understood that wealth alone could not guarantee success. Plans were made to ensure that growth served the people, not just foreign companies or a select few. Roads were built, not only to connect cities but to reach remote villages, bringing electricity and clean water to places long cut off by the desert. Programs encouraged locals to study abroad and return with skills that could shape the nation's future. The balance between modernization and tradition was delicate, but it was one they worked to maintain. Every major project carried stories of personal transformation. A fisherman who had once set out at dawn in a small dhow might now work at a port, unloading goods from ships that came from halfway across the globe. His son, instead of following him to the sea, might study engineering in a classroom filled with modern equipment. His daughter might become a teacher or a nurse, roles that had never been open to women in earlier generations. These changes were not just visible in the skyline, but in the lives of individual families. The pace of development was dizzying. In just a few decades, villages that had relied on lanterns for light and wells for water became cities with towering buildings and international airports. The desert was still there, vast and silent beyond the city limits. But inside the growing urban centers, life moved to a new rhythm. The sound of waves breaking on the shore blended with the roar of jet engines overhead and the constant hum of traffic. People adapted as best they could, holding on to traditions even as they embraced the possibilities of a global future. The transformation was not smooth or easy, but it was unstoppable, driven by the shared belief that progress, once begun, could never be turned back. The desert sky once seemed endless, with nothing taller than a palm tree or the sail of a dhow breaking the horizon. Today, glass towers rise where the sand once stretched, reflecting sunlight like great mirrors. These skyscrapers are not only buildings but symbols, each one a statement of ambition. They tell the world that a region once known for its pearl divers and traders now competes on a global stage. Their shapes and heights are as much about identity as they are about function. Dubai's skyline began humbly in the 1970s. The tallest structures then were modest hotels and government buildings, their concrete forms standing out against low traditional houses. Oil had brought wealth, but the city still felt small. As trade expanded and new industries took root, more buildings rose, each one taller than the last. By the 1990s, steel and glass began to dominate the view. Cranes dotted the city like sentinels, lifting beams and panels into place. Each project aimed to outshine the one before, reflecting a belief that architecture could show the strength and vision of the nation. The most famous of these projects was the Burj Khalifa. From its earliest plans, it was designed to be more than a building. It would be the tallest structure on Earth, a feat of engineering that pushed the limits of what was possible. Construction began with deep foundations driven into the desert soil, massive piles of concrete and steel anchoring it against wind and shifting sand. Thousands of workers from many countries labored in shifts, their days and nights blending as they poured concrete and raised steel higher and higher. As the tower grew, it became a source of pride, not just for Dubai, but for the entire region. When it finally opened, its spire piercing the clouds, it stood as proof of what vision and resources could achieve. The Burj Khalifa changed how people saw Dubai. Visitors from around the world came to stand at its base and look up, craning their necks to follow its soaring lines. From its top floors, the city stretched out in every direction, a mosaic of lights and roads. For the people who lived there, it became a landmark, a point by which they measured progress. Yet it was not only about height. Its design included elements inspired by desert flowers and Islamic geometry, a reminder that even in modern form, tradition remained at the heart of the vision. Across the city, this blending of old and new became a theme. Architects experimented with ways to honor Arabic heritage while embracing modern techniques. Some towers included arches reminiscent of ancient forts. Others used patterns found in traditional weaving or calligraphy, etched into glass and steel. Courtyards, once central to desert homes, were reimagined in public spaces, offering shade and gathering places amid towering structures. This dialogue between past and present gave the skyline depth, making it more than a collection of tall buildings. As the city grew, another challenge emerged. Sustainability. Building in the desert meant dealing with extreme heat, scarce water, and fragile ecosystems. Early projects focused only on size and speed, but over time, attention shifted to designs that could endure without harming the environment. Solar panels began to appear on rooftops, capturing the relentless sun and turning it into energy. Green buildings were constructed with materials that kept interiors cool without heavy reliance on air conditioning. Systems were developed to recycle water, ensuring that growth did not come at the expense of the land. Masdar City became a bold experiment in this direction. Built near Abu Dhabi, it aimed to be a model of sustainable urban living. Streets were narrow and shaded to reduce heat. Cars were banned from much of the city, replaced by electric transport pods. Buildings were designed to channel the desert breeze, cooling spaces naturally. Solar farms surrounded the area, providing clean energy. While not every part of Masdar's vision was realized, it sparked conversations about what cities of the future could be in harsh climates. It showed that progress did not have to mean abandoning responsibility to the environment. Behind every building were stories of the people who made them possible. Engineers worked long hours in the heat, solving problems that came with building at unprecedented scales. Local craftsmen collaborated with international teams, blending techniques passed down through generations with modern technology. For many foreign workers, these projects were both livelihood and challenge, a chance to send money home while contributing to something that would shape the skyline for decades to come. The human effort behind the shining facades was immense, though often unseen. The rapid rise of skyscrapers changed daily life. Streets once quiet now bustled with traffic. Markets were replaced by malls, where glass escalators carried shoppers past fountains and displays. From the top floors of the towers, people could see the desert still stretching at the edges of the city, a reminder of how recent the transformation had been. For elders who remembered when the tallest structure was a minaret, the change felt almost like a dream. They told stories to the young of the days before towers, when navigation was done by stars, and survival depended on wells and palm groves. Even as the buildings grew higher, the sense of identity remained rooted in the land. Architecture became a way to express this balance. A skyscraper might house global companies and luxury apartments, yet its entrance could be framed by carvings that echoed ancient symbols. A modern office block might be built with local stone, its texture recalling the forts that once guarded trade routes. These choices were deliberate, signaling to the world that progress did not erase history. Instead, it built upon it. The evolution of the skyline reflected the ambitions of the nation itself. In the 1970s, a few scattered towers stood like markers of possibility. By the 2000s, the horizon had become a forest of glass and steel. Each new addition seemed to rise faster than the last, driven by competition and vision. Some were designed as landmarks, like the sail-shaped Burj Al Arab or the twisting Cayenne Tower. Others were practical, built to house the growing population and businesses. Together, they formed a landscape that spoke of determination and adaptability. At night, the towers lit up like beacons. Their reflections shimmered on the water, blending with the lights of ships moving through the ports. From the desert, the glow was visible for miles, a modern oasis shining in the dark. The skyline became a kind of language, its shapes and lights telling a story of where the nation had been and where it hoped to go. For those who lived within it, these buildings were not just places to work or sleep. They were symbols of resilience, creativity, and vision, monuments to a journey from sand to sky. The wealth from oil had built cities, roads, and a modern nation, but the leaders of the Emirates knew that oil would not last forever. Beneath the ground, reserves were finite, and the world itself was beginning to shift toward cleaner energy. The desert that had once hidden pearls and then oil now stood at another turning point. The question was no longer how to extract wealth from beneath the sand, but how to build a future that could thrive without it. The first step was to look beyond oil and see the other strengths of the land and its people. Tourism emerged as a natural path. Visitors from around the world began arriving to see the Gulf's mix of tradition and modernity. They came to walk through ancient forts in the morning and stand atop the world's tallest tower by evening. Beaches, desert safaris, and luxury resorts turned the Emirates into a destination where old and new coexisted. Hotels rose along the coast, and airports expanded to welcome millions of travelers each year. Tourism brought more than money. It opened doors to cultural exchange, showing visitors a region that was proud of its heritage and bold in its ambitions. Finance followed tourism. With its strategic location between East and West, the Emirates became a natural meeting point for global markets. Modern financial districts were built, filled with banks, trading firms, and offices of international companies. Regulations were designed to attract investors while ensuring stability. As a result, cities like Dubai and Abu Dhabi became hubs for global business. The flow of capital no longer depended only on the price of oil, but on the movement of ideas and partnerships. Technology joined tourism, and finance as a pillar of growth. Startups found space to experiment in special economic zones, while large companies brought innovation in fields like renewable energy, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology. Universities expanded their programs to prepare students for new careers that required skills beyond drilling and construction. The shift was deliberate and guided by long-term planning, a recognition that knowledge itself was a resource as valuable as oil once had been. Among the most visible symbols of diversification was Emirates Airline. Founded with a small fleet and a bold vision, it grew into one of the world's leading carriers. Its planes connected cities across the globe, bringing people to Dubai not only as tourists, but also as business travelers. The airline became a bridge between continents, reflecting the nation's role as a crossroads of trade and culture. For many travelers, their first glimpse of the Emirates was through the windows of an Emirates plane, a moving symbol of progress and connectivity. Hosting international events further cemented the UAE's global role. Expo 2020, delayed by a global pandemic, but finally opened to the world, showcased innovation from hundreds of nations. Pavilions displayed technology, art, and ideas for the future. Visitors walked through spaces that celebrated both heritage and possibility. It was more than an exhibition. It was a statement that the Emirates belonged at the center of global conversations. Years later, COP28, a major climate summit, brought world leaders together to discuss the urgent challenge of climate change. Holding such events signaled that the country was not only a participant in world affairs, but also a host for dialogue and solutions. Investments in renewable energy reflected this commitment to the future. Massive solar farms appeared in the desert, their panels stretching like lakes of glass beneath the sun. Wind projects and research into hydrogen energy added to the mix. These efforts were practical as well as symbolic, showing that a land once defined by oil could also lead in clean energy. Programs encouraged citizens and companies to reduce waste, recycle water, and adopt sustainable practices. Bit by bit, the nation began to rewrite its relationship with the environment. Space exploration was perhaps the most striking example of looking beyond the limits of the Earth itself. The UAE launched a Mars mission, sending a probe called Hope into space. It was not just a scientific project, but a statement of ambition. Building and launching the probe required partnerships with global space agencies and universities. Young Emirati engineers worked alongside international experts, gaining skills that could inspire future generations. When Hope successfully entered Mars orbit, the achievement was celebrated across the country. Children watched the news and dreamed of becoming astronauts or scientists. The desert, once seen as an empty expanse, had become the launchpad for journeys to other worlds. These efforts were not isolated. Each one connected to a broader strategy for resilience. Leaders studied global markets, anticipating changes before they came. They built reserves of wealth to support the economy during downturns. They created systems to encourage entrepreneurship, giving small businesses the chance to grow. When global oil prices dropped, these preparations helped the nation adapt without falling into crisis. Diversification was not a single project, but a mindset, one that valued flexibility and foresight. For ordinary people, the changes were visible in daily life. A fisherman, whose father had once sailed a small dhow, might now run a tour company, taking visitors on desert excursions or coastal cruises. His children might attend universities that offered degrees in robotics or environmental science. Markets, once filled with pearls and spices, now sold electronics and handmade crafts to tourists. Streets buzzed with languages from every corner of the world, a sign of the nation's growing international reach. The transition was not without challenges. Rapid growth brought pressure on housing, infrastructure, and resources. Balancing modernization with tradition required constant attention. Elders worried that cultural values might be lost amid skyscrapers and foreign influences. Leaders responded by supporting festivals, museums, and educational programs that kept history alive. Mosques and souks stood beside modern towers, reminders that progress did not have to erase the past. In some ways, the story of diversification mirrored the story of survival in earlier times. Just as the ancestors had adapted to the desert's harshness by reading its signs and learning from its rhythms, the modern nation adapted to the global landscape. Where once the danger had been drought or famine, now it was economic instability or environmental crisis. The skills were different, but the spirit was the same. Flexibility, resilience, and unity remained at the core. When the Mars mission succeeded, an elder in a coastal village watched the celebration on a television powered by solar energy. He remembered stories his grandfather had told about the first pearl fleets and the first oil wells. As he looked at the images of a spacecraft circling a distant planet, he realized that the journey of his people had always been about reaching beyond what seemed possible. The future no longer lay only in the ground beneath their feet, but also in the stars above and in the ideas that connected them to the rest of the world. Through diversification, they were preparing not just for life after oil, but for a world where imagination itself was the greatest resource. The call to prayer drifted over the city at dawn, weaving through towers of glass and steel, over wide highways and across quiet courtyards where families gathered before the day began. Life in the Emirates had become fast and modern, yet beneath the hum of engines and the glow of neon lights, the heartbeat of tradition remained strong. The people understood that progress meant more than new buildings and global connections. It also meant holding on to the stories, skills, and rituals that had shaped them for centuries. Falconry was one of these traditions. In the past, it had been a way to hunt for food in the desert, a skill that demanded patience and respect for nature. Today, it was practiced as a sport and a living link to the past. In the cool mornings, men and women carried their falcons to open fields outside the cities. The birds, hooded and calm, perched on gloved hands until the moment came to release them. With a swift movement, they soared into the sky, circling high before diving with astonishing speed. Children watched with awe, learning not only the techniques but also the values behind the practice: discipline, care, and harmony with the natural world. Camel racing held a similar place in the culture. Once, camels were essential for travel and survival, their endurance unmatched in the harsh desert. Racing began as friendly competition between tribes. Over time, it grew into a celebrated sport with modern tracks and organized events. The sight of camels thundering down a track, their long legs moving in rhythm, drew crowds from across the region. Robots now rode in place of children, a change made to protect young riders while keeping the tradition alive. These races were more than entertainment. They were reminders of a shared history, bringing communities together as they once gathered around desert campfires. Storytelling was another thread connecting past and present. Before books and screens, history lived in spoken words. Elders told tales of heroes, journeys, and lessons learned under the desert stars. These stories carried knowledge of survival, where to find water, how to read the wind, how to resolve disputes with honor. Today, the settings had changed. Stories might be told in classrooms or on festival stages, yet their purpose was the same. They taught the younger generation who they were and where they came from, giving meaning to a rapidly changing world. To protect and share these traditions, the Emirates built museums and heritage villages. In these spaces, visitors walked through reconstructed desert camps, explored displays of ancient tools, and listened to recordings of traditional songs. Artifacts such as pearl diving weights, hand-woven baskets, and old fishing nets were carefully preserved. Cultural festivals added life to these efforts. Markets filled with the scent of spices and grilled meats, while dancers performed in traditional dress. These gatherings welcomed both locals and visitors, celebrating the roots of a nation while opening them to the world. The Emirates became a meeting point for cultures far beyond its borders. People from every continent arrived to work, trade, and build new lives. In the streets of Dubai or Abu Dhabi, dozens of languages could be heard in a single day. Cafes served coffee spiced with cardamom, beside restaurants offering dishes from India, Africa, Europe, and beyond. This diversity gave the cities a unique energy. It also brought challenges. With so many backgrounds and beliefs sharing the same space, questions arose about identity and belonging. Leaders recognized the need to balance openness with unity. Schools taught children about the nation's history and values, ensuring they understood the principles that held society together. Laws were designed to protect the rights of all residents while maintaining respect for local customs. Public spaces, from mosques to parks, became places where cultures met and mingled. Sometimes misunderstandings occurred, but dialogue and shared experiences helped build trust. The very diversity that created tension also created resilience, teaching people to adapt and cooperate. As the Emirates grew more connected to the world, its role in diplomacy and humanitarian aid expanded. The nation offered assistance to countries struck by disaster, sending food, medical supplies, and volunteers. Hospitals were built abroad with Emirati support, and refugee camps received funding to improve conditions. These actions were not only about charity, but about building relationships. By helping others, the Emirates strengthened ties that could lead to peace and stability. One case stood out in particular. When conflict erupted in a distant region, the Emirates hosted peace talks. Delegations from opposing sides arrived, weary from years of fighting. Negotiations stretched late into the night, guided by mediators who emphasized respect and compromise. Though the path was difficult, progress was made. A ceasefire was reached, giving civilians a chance to rebuild their lives. For the hosts, this was a moment of quiet pride. It showed that a small nation could play a large role in healing divisions far beyond its borders. International events further highlighted this role. When Expo 2020 opened, it welcomed participants from across the globe. Pavilions displayed innovations in technology, art, and culture. Visitors walked through exhibits that celebrated human creativity while learning about sustainability and cooperation. The event was both a celebration and a statement. The Emirates stood ready to engage with the world as a partner and leader. Yet, with such global connections, the challenge of cultural integration grew more complex. In some neighborhoods, entire streets reflected a single nationality, while others mixed many together. Festivals celebrated different faiths and traditions, but balancing them required care. Misunderstandings sometimes sparked debate over how much change was too much. Local families worried that their heritage might be lost amid foreign influences. To address this, programs were launched to encourage cultural exchange. Schools hosted events where children shared stories from their families. Art centers displayed works by both local and international artists, showing how differences could blend into something new. The balance between tradition and globalization was visible in daily life. A young woman might leave her modern apartment, ride the metro to work in a glass tower, and stop on the way home to buy dates from a vendor whose family had farmed them for generations. A man might check his smartphone for news before attending a camel race with his children. In these small acts, the old and the new met, neither erasing the other. Elders often reflected on this balance. They remembered a time when the horizon was empty, when survival depended on reading the stars and knowing the secret paths of the desert. Now, they watched planes streak across the sky and saw their grandchildren studying robotics and space science. They understood that change was necessary, but they also urged the young to carry their roots with them. Tradition, they said, was not a barrier to progress, it was an anchor, holding steady even as the winds of globalization blew strong. The skyline itself told this story. Mosques with intricate minarets stood beside towering skyscrapers. Souks filled with handmade goods thrived near luxury malls, selling the latest fashions. In one glance, a person could see centuries of history and the unfolding future. This coexistence was fragile, yet it gave the nation its character. It reminded everyone that the path forward was not about choosing between past and present, but weaving them together into something enduring. Through this balance, the Emirates shaped not only its own identity, but also its place in the world. Long ago, a gazelle ran across the desert, its hooves light against the shifting sand. Hunters chased it, driven by hunger and hope. They thought they were pursuing food for a single day, but the gazelle led them to something greater. An island, surrounded by water, a place where life could take root. That moment became legend, a story told around fires and in family gatherings. It explained how Abu Dhabi came to be, but it also carried a deeper truth. Sometimes, what seems like a small pursuit opens the way to an unexpected future. The people of the Emirates have followed their own gazelles many times since that first one disappeared into the brush. At first, survival meant knowing how to track water, care for camels, and read the desert winds. Life was measured in tents, fishing nets, and pearl baskets. Then came the oil, black and hidden beneath the sand like a secret treasure. It promised wealth and power, but it also demanded wisdom. The discovery of oil was another chase, not of an animal, but of opportunity. Just as the hunters once followed the gazelle, leaders and communities followed the promise of progress, unsure where it would lead, but unwilling to turn back. The journey was not simple. In ancient times, a wrong step could mean thirst or hunger. In modern times, the dangers were different: rapid change, outside influence, and the risk of forgetting who they were. The desert had once been the teacher, offering lessons in patience and endurance. Those same lessons were needed when cities began to rise and skyscrapers reached into the sky. The hunt had changed, but the skills remained the same. Resilience, cooperation, and vision still determined whether the people would thrive. Other nations watched this transformation with curiosity. They saw villages turn into global cities within a single lifetime. They saw airports grow busier than ancient caravan routes and towers replace tents. Some wondered how it happened so quickly. The answer was not only oil. It was the ability to adapt without losing sight of the past. A gazelle runs fast, but it does not forget the path it came from. In the same way, the UAE moved forward while carrying its traditions, its stories, and its values. For individuals, the story offered guidance. A young entrepreneur could see herself in the hunters of old. Her challenge might not be sandstorms or scarcity, but competition and innovation. Like the hunters, she needed courage to chase a dream, even when the outcome was uncertain. A teacher in a new school, filled with children from many nations, could look to the past and see how different tribes once came together for survival. His classroom became a modern version of that gathering, where unity brought strength. As the world faced new problems, climate change, technological disruption, and shifting economies, the lessons of the desert remained relevant. The early generations learned to survive by respecting their environment, taking only what they needed, and preparing for lean times. Today, those principles guided the building of green energy projects and sustainable cities. Vast solar farms stretched across the desert, capturing the same sun that once scorched travelers. Buildings were designed to use less power, their shapes inspired by traditional wind towers that cooled homes without electricity. In these ways, the old wisdom merged with modern science. Artificial intelligence became another frontier, as transformative as oil once was. Where drills once reached deep into the earth, algorithms now explored data and patterns. AI shaped transportation, healthcare, and education. It could predict traffic to reduce congestion or assist doctors in diagnosing illnesses. Yet it raised questions, just as oil had. How should this power be used? Who should benefit from it? The answers required the same careful leadership, that once guided negotiations with foreign companies and tribal elders. Technology was a tool, not a destiny. Its value depended on the hands that wielded it. Cities of the future began to take shape. Masdar City, with its shaded walkways and car-free zones, stood as an experiment in what was possible. Planners imagined communities where clean energy powered every home, where water was recycled endlessly, and where nature and architecture coexisted. These visions were ambitious, but so was the idea of chasing a gazelle into unknown territory. The first hunters could not have imagined skyscrapers or space travel, just as today's planners could not predict every challenge ahead. Still, the willingness to try, to run after a dream, remained constant. The UAE's Mars mission was perhaps the clearest example of this spirit. When the Hope probe was launched, it carried not only instruments and cameras, but also the aspirations of an entire nation. It was a statement that exploration did not stop at the edge of the desert or the surface of the sea. Just as ancient navigators once followed stars to guide their journeys, modern engineers now sent machines to those same stars, seeking knowledge and connection. The desert had taught generations to look up at the sky for direction. Now, they were reaching into that sky, extending the hunt to worlds beyond their own. The Emirates' journey offered lessons for others. Wealth alone could not explain their transformation. Many places had resources, but lacked the vision to use them wisely. The difference lay in leadership and community. When a tribe moved through the desert, every member had a role. Some scouted ahead, some carried water, some cared for the young and the old. In the same way, a nation's progress depended on cooperation. Governments, businesses, families, and individuals had to work together, each contributing to the shared goal. This model could inspire countries facing their own challenges, whether they were rebuilding after conflict or adapting to new technologies. In a small coastal village, an elder told the gazelle story to a group of children gathered at his feet. As he spoke, the city's lights glimmered in the distance, their reflection dancing on the waves. He explained how the gazelle had been more than an animal. It was a symbol of guidance, a reminder that destiny often appeared in unexpected forms. He pointed toward the skyline, where towers rose like spears into the night. Once we followed a gazelle to water, he said. Now we follow ideas and dreams. The chase never ends. The children listened, wide-eyed, imagining the hunters running across the dunes. Some thought of becoming engineers or pilots, others doctors or artists. Each of them carried a different dream, but the story gave them a common thread. It told them that they were part of a journey stretching back centuries and forward into futures not yet seen. As the elder finished, the desert wind stirred, carrying the scent of salt and sand. In that moment, past and present seemed to meet. The hunters of long ago, the divers and traders, the builders of cities and spacecraft, all were part of the same pursuit. From the soft footsteps of a gazelle to the towering heights of skyscrapers, the journey continued, guided by resilience and vision, ever reaching for what lay just beyond the horizon.